Dang, man. I've been having, I get seasonal jock itch. And this isn't an advertisement. I actually get seasonal jock itch. And I notice, man, this is going to sound, I don't, sometimes for me, I'm not saying this to everybody, but for me, sometimes my scrotum, my newts, uh, are nuts. That's a soft U, my nuts. Dang, man. I've been having, I get seasonal jock itch. And this isn't an advertisement. I actually get seasonal jock itch. And I notice, man, this is going to sound, I don't, sometimes for me, I'm not saying this to everybody, but for me, sometimes my scrotum, my newts, are nuts. That's a soft U, my nuts. It's like the inside of them will itch, and you can't get in there, you can't. You can, the best you can do as a human is itch the outside of your nuts, and I think it is that, and I'm not trying to be base here. I'm not trying to be, base or, vile. I'm not trying to be a bad, a bad little Daniel, who's been out in the, smoking dope in the yard and hiding, hiding sugar treats, different sugar treats in the chimney and stuff like that, and trying to keep, sugar treats from his brothers and sisters. I'm not trying to be like a bad Daniel. I'm just telling you that, that sometimes you have an itch on the inside, and you can't reach it, man. Sometimes there's things you can't reach. There's parts of you can't just change and adjust with your hands. I could scratch anything that's on the outside of my, my nuts or my scrotum, and you can do any of that. But sometimes if there's something that's inside of you, you got to go a little further. You have to go a little deeper, and you have to actually do work. You got to do work. You have to make it. You have to take the long way through your brain and through your neck and through your belly and through, you got to go the long way to quell that inner itch. I can't itch the inside of my nuts. I can only itch the outside. But sometimes after scratching on the outside of my nuts for so long, it's just, it's just, I'm not really solving, that inner, that inner chicky that's in my scrotum. And so that's where I'm at right now is, I'm wanting to do that hard work. I'm wanting to put in that dirty W, that dirty work I want the inside of my nuts looking clean, boy. When I go up to Heaven, when I go up, to North Heaven, bro, because I'm not hanging out in South Heaven. A lot of people be like, I'm going to go to heaven. You're going to get into heaven, but what part are you going to live in? You're going to be in South Heaven? Fuck that. Okay? A knock knock, who's there? A fuck that. Fuck that is here. I want to live in North Heaven, okay? I don't want to be over there in South Heaven where people are, popping off and, they got, pigeons out there selling drugs on their wings and shit. I don't want that. I want to live up there in North Heaven, where the inside of me is just as pristine as the outside. And so that's where I'm at sometimes today. I've been thinking about, man, I'm trying to scratch some of these inner itches, and I can't. It's just, they're not things I can do with my hands. There are things I got to work harder. I got to take extra action. I just have, who's listening? I think about maybe it's like somebody that's selling kites, a little kite salesman, a little lady, it's just drive, maybe she got a little buggy or a little cart, and she pushing that cart around, just slinging them fake birds, baby, them kites, them air kites. I think about a lady just kind of, she got a couple, like a little kite buggy, and she's just peddling them kites. Because people forget about kites, dude. Before they had birds, they had kites, and people, and I don't even know if that's true, but I don't know what the timeline of it all is. But before they had, at some time birds weren't doing what they were supposed to do. And so somebody made kites, a scientist or, engineer. which is basically an engineer is a scientist that actually fucking does something. Okay. You know, everybody wants to talk about scientists and this and that in lab coats and people bringing their own lunch to the lab, and doing all that, and somebody grilling up a little, a can of, anchovies on a Bunsen burner. Fuck all of that, man. That's scientists. But who's really doing shit is engineers. Okay. Engineers are basically people they come in and they see what a scientist is doing, and then they actually take it and do some shit. Okay? Because scientists will just mill around in a laboratory their whole life, mixing things, making. One dude was in there for a month. He made Kool-Aid. Like, bro, that ain't shit, dog. You know what I'm saying? At least come out with some, something wild, some fucking guava menthol, magic hitter sauce. But engineers actually do something. Okay? Engineers actually do something. And so that's what I think about who's out there listening to this. Who's listening to this podcast, maybe an engineer, maybe somebody that's who could be listening? Oh, maybe somebody that's on a dance team, like a lady that's on like an adult dance team, and she's stuck in traffic and she got sequins and all on her, and she's sweating. And so some of the sequins is getting all wet, and she's listening to this past weekend. Or maybe a milkman, they got a lot of milkmans out there. And if you don't know what a milkman is oh wait, I was talking about kites, bro. I just remembered. Yeah, I think somebody that could be listening is a kite maker, because there was a time in history, this is where I went. There was a time in history when birds gave up on themselves. A lot of different things happened. Bird flu, some bird, a bird and a pig, did something. And swine flu hit the air. So they had bird flu and swine flu in the air at the same time. Fucking, turkey sausage, really, the market went downhill, that TS market. And there were no birds in the air for, I don't know how long, could have been 6 or 7 years. And that's when kites were invented, because people still wanted to see things in the sky. You know what I'm saying? If you look at the sky and there's nothing in it, you get fucking bored as fuck. But now that somebody made kites, and a kite is just a paper bird on a string, It's just that one-dimensional fucking bird. A kite, you get a kite up in the air, and a kite, you get that kite up there, and, especially if somebody's dumb or if they're a kid, they think it's a bird. From 40 feet away, a kite is a fucking bird, that might have one, maybe a long, tampon string in or something. I don't know what a kid thinks. But they had, I picture maybe somebody like that. A family, the Wilsons, that lived about 2 blocks from me growing up. And I remember when I was young, the Wilsons, their family was wild, and the mother had passed away. The mother Wilson, I don't remember what happened to her, man. She had died, and they had her ashes on the mantle. But this family, when a lot of Guns N' Roses and rock and roll music would come on, they'd blindfold. The whole family would get blindfolded, right? Or tie something around their head and just mosh pit in the living room. The daddy and 3 boys. Okay? And they would just be fucking mosh pitting, bro, and losing their minds, dude. And that's how they showed affection to one another. And it's really beautiful to think about it different ways. There's some type of animal. I think it's a marmoset or something. But if they get upset, if they love another animal, they rip its head off. That's how they show it love, dude. That's crazy. Flamingos, if you know this or not, if they love another flamingo, they'll like shit by it. That ain't no Valentine's Day as far as I'm concerned. But to flamingos, that's their universe. Different people have different ways of showing affections. But the Wilson family, they would get, and they had one son, this boy named Yikes was his name. Kind of like, like yikes, like you're scared, but still trying to seem kind of cool. And but the family, I remember they were fucking raging one night. Everybody's got, blindfold. And one of them had, like a sleeping mask that like a senior citizen would wear, or like a supermodel kind of wears when they sleep. And the daddy had just a shirt kind of tied around his eyes, real tight. And they were just losing their minds, just listening to Guns N' Roses in the living room. I want to know. I want to go. I want you, please take me. and somebody swung their arm and I think it was Yikes and knocked the mother's urn, the urn of ashes into the air. And they don't fucking know it, but I know it. I'm watching. And I saw these 4 boys, dude, just dancing to Paradise City, just in their mother's ashes, bro. As the ashes just filling the room, just, whew, and they're just losing their fucking minds mosh pitting. And it was beautiful. It was just beautiful to see that family together, even in the kind of this cryptic sort of wild kind of, bad dancing sort of sense. And then one of the kids, one time they were doing that stuff, blindfolding and dancing and having fun together and showing love. And one of them blindfolded themselves with a plastic bag over their whole head and ended up in a coma, I think, or something. So yeah. And he might have died. I don't think he died, but
he comes to me at nighttime, so I'm dealing with the whole nocturnal emissions, the whole, wet dreaming.
Oh yeah, man. I feel you, bro. That fucking dark bust. Onward.
So I just wanted to get your thoughts and, what you think about a situation like that. So appreciate everything you got for me.
Amen, Tony. I appreciate you calling. And yeah, you talking about that dark bust, you talking, we used to call it, what did they call it when I was young? That Aladdin jizz. Cause you would think, you wasn't going to have it because you hadn't been rubbing your lamp, and then bam, your dick just starts granting you fucking wet wishes in the middle of the night. And they would call that Aladdin jizz. But yeah, I feel you, man. Look, it's almost, that dark bust is dangerous because you don't think, you changing your game, and I applaud you for 9 months. To not do anything for 9 months is fascinating, bro. And it takes willpower, and that's where it takes that manhood. And you did that, man. He did that. Congrats on that. But yeah, bro, dude, it's crazy. And a long time ago, back in, wizarding days, and when people had witches and all of that kind of shit, and, people eating frogs and all of that, they would, if you busted out in the middle of the night, they'd fucking get rid of you, Or some people thought you were a damn, you were you probably had a leak, you had that subterranean, that subconscious leak. But yeah, baby, you got that fucking wild drip. But I would say that that you are blessed, brother. You're blessed. And I agree, man. Look, because here's the thing about Satan, baby boy, or S-atin, or S-atin. Satan's going to find a way to get it out of you. Because think about what it is that's in you. What is inside of you is that body jism. And that is something you want to hold. That's your manhood, brother. That's your manhood. That's your children are in there. That is your children. That is your great grandfather. That's it. That it is in your body. It is in your jism. And that's why the devil try to get it out of you. And whether he gets you to play that one shot monkey, or whether he gets you to he lulls you into those dark dreams, and then he'll spray it out of you while you're resting. That dark bust. He's going to try and get it out of you. But let me say this. If he gets it out of you through the nocturnal emissions, you didn't help him. You got no fingerprints on the weapon, brother. You know what I'm saying? That's not your crime. So if you want to let Satan be a criminal, that's fine, because he is a criminal. And he's going to get that out of you, He's going to get that naughty sauce, He's going to pull that naughty sauce out of your sauce router. But don't you help him. And that's why I'm proud of you, brother. I'm so proud of you, man. Thank you for calling. And that was Tony right there. And he sounds like a brother out there in Wisconsin.